Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our 11th and final Paralympian podcast. I have Darren Harris here with us, who is a dual Paralympic athlete. Thank you so much for joining us, Darren.
Good morning, Dave.
How are you doing, Darren? Are you okay?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, just it's the end of the week, isn't it? So I always look forward to that.
Yeah, we've got that Friday feeling, definitely. So I'm just going to sort of proceed, Darren, by sort of asking you to firstly tell our audience a little bit about yourself and what you're best known for in terms of the sports that you participated in as a Paralympic athlete.
I've tried a few different sports. I've done athletics, done judo, but I suppose what I'm most known for is football. I played blind football from 1996 till 2019, became England's most capped blind footballer, played 162 games, scored, I think, 34 goals, captain England as well, and won 10 world and European medals. So yeah, pretty good career.
Very, very good career, very long career as well, Darren. You don't hear of many people that are able to, sustain at that level for such a long period of time. So, that's a massive credit to yourself and obviously your training regime. Yeah, carry on, Darren. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, yeah. I mean, it is kind of unusual, but it's not impossible. And I think a lot of that comes down to, some lifestyle choices, which we can talk about a little bit later.
Yes, definitely. So I want to just sort of take you back a little bit in time to your childhood. For those that are listening, you were born in Wolverhampton. So you're a Midlands lad, just like myself.
Yeah, it's not too bad.
No, people say it is very dark and bleak, but I love the Midlands. It's a great place. So you were diagnosed at a very young age with a very rare form of eye cancer. And as you were growing up, your eyesight did start to deteriorate. How did you find that sport was sort of able to aid in your personal development?
I think when my sight was deteriorating, it was quite gradual at first. I didn't really notice it on a day-to-day basis. And so I kind of carried on doing sport like kind of every other kid. I played football in the living room at home, knocking over the vases and the chairs. And I played football in the garden, kicking the ball over the neighbour's fence. And, what kids do, climbing over, jumping on people's flower beds. And then obviously I played sport at school. So I went to a mainstream primary school and I played football there. We played rounders. I wasn't very good at rounders. I did struggle to sort of see the ball when playing that. And we did a bit of cross country running as well. We were kind of by this disused part of the Severn Valley Railway, and we used to do cross country running along that. So I was always very active. But I think as my sight got worse, then I started to sort of find it harder to kind of compete on a sort of level playing field, you might say. So back in those days when we played 11-side football, we played on a full-size pitch. We had full-size goals. We were sort of 9 and 10 years old, but it was massive. And I remember, one of your teammates would be sort of miles away. A, you couldn't kick the ball that far, and B, for me, with my sight getting worse, I couldn't even see that far. So yeah, it started to get more and more difficult for me, and that's when my mum found out about Worcester College for the Blind.
Yeah. So what age was it that you went to Worcester College, Darren? Sorry.
I went there when I was 11.
11,
yeah.
So at secondary school sort of age. So, very much the early part of your sort of development in sport was playing alongside, those with no visual impairments or disabilities. So that must have been a major challenge, I suppose, in the early days.
Yeah, it really was. Yeah. I mean, I suppose in some ways it probably helped me, if you had the right mindset where you're prepared to give it a go. In essence, I was always training with people who were better than me. If they had more sight than me, they had an advantage, and therefore I had to work that much harder to kind of stay involved and stay competitive. So, looking back on it now, it probably helped me to a certain degree, but it did also start to kind of, that build up of frustration did start to happen as I became more of a sort of a periphery figure in the game, or maybe someone wouldn't pass to me because they thought I probably wouldn't control it or something like that. So yeah, I suppose my sight deteriorated that kind of right rate where by the time I left primary school, I was probably done with it.
So still, while we're sort of talking about your early years involved in sport, Darren, you know, many athletes have sporting heroes or a coach that's really inspired them, or even an idol, someone who impacted them during their early sporting career. Was there a particular individual or person that really sort of helped you develop or inspired you to go on and achieve the things that you have done?
I don't suppose so much when I was younger. I wasn't really one that had sort of ideals off TV. I mean, I did watch sport on TV. I loved boxing when I was younger. So you know, you had sort of Mike Tyson, you had Marvin Hagler, Roberto Duran. We had those guys who were just like smashing it. So I was quite an aggressive kid. So I loved all the fighting sports. I did watch football as well when I was younger. But I think most of my idols were much kind of closer to me. They were like, you know, they were the kids in the playground who was the fastest runner. It was someone in my neighborhood who was really cool on the bike. You know, we used to make, you know, BMX was quite big then, and we used to make our own ramps and things like that. So, you know, you'd find some disused milk trays and a few bits of wood, and you'd sort of, you know, stack them up and you'd create your own BMX ramps. And so it was always people that were much closer to me, more tangible, that were the people I found sort of inspiring.
That's really, really, you know, pleasant to hear, because many people take for granted those that are closest to them, you know, and those friends that maybe are a little bit better than you, or, you know, able to do things that you aspire to do. It motivates you and drives you on. And it just goes to show that the community around sport, you know, particularly in the grassroots sort of level, really helps develop young people, you know, to go on to achieve things later in life, whether that's sports related or business related. Darren, I'm going to sort of take the opportunity now to ask if any of our audience would like to ask you any questions at all. So if anyone who does have a question here on Zoom, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. Alternatively, those that are listening live on Facebook, if you did want to pop a comment on the Facebook post, I can then ask Darren for you. Hi, Clive.
Darren, can you hear me?
I can.
Hi, it's Clive Spencer here. I thought I'd better say hello before you said anything about New College Worcester. I haven't really got a question. No, just, I mean, I expect you're going to say more about your international career subsequently, so I'll just let you carry on, but I just thought I'd say hello before I miss the opportunity.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Clive, and it's always a pleasure to have you listening in. He's a massive part of BBS, and you know, he does some exceptional work in the VI community. So Darren,
I mean, I'd like to kind of, I mean, if he wants to, he was kind of worried about me saying something horrible about New College Worcester. I did have a tough time there, but actually, when you're old and you can reflect on things and you can see what a positive impact it had on you, and I think, you know, I always remember my first day at the college, actually, because when I went there, it was an all boys school, and I remember I had a pair of football boots with me because I'd never played football on concrete before, and I remember walking out of the gym, and there was this sort of rectangular of concrete, and you had these two white boards at the end of the pitch, and they were the goals, and there was these lads sort of kicking around a ball, and this ball had ball bearings in. I'd never come across a ball with ball bearings in it before, and I said to the lads, "Excuse me, where's the football pitch?" And they went, "Well, this is the pitch." So I put my football boots down and jumped on and got on with it. And but I suppose the other thing was that I went to Worcester. I couldn't swim. I was a terrible swimmer, and there we had a swimming pool at the college, and I was kind of had the opportunity to have a go at swimming, you know, on a day by day basis. We had lessons there, but they also had they used to have swimming classes on a Wednesday and a Saturday, because in those days we had Saturday morning school, would you believe it? So we had Wednesdays afternoons off and we had Saturday morning school. So on Wednesday afternoons and Saturday afternoons, you could go and do more sports. So, and I actually became a half decent swimmer, but But Mr. Spencer, I still feel a bit uncomfortable calling him Clyde, but he was an incredible athlete himself. You know, I think he was a sub 3 hour marathon runner, and I think all kids, you all think you're super fit, and then you've got this adult who was running around, and you were trying to keep up with him, doing everything he did. And I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for taking us on all of those trips, because I'm sure it was all in your spare time, and you know, we went everywhere. There's so many opportunities for us to do stuff.
That's really, really inspiring. And, you know, without people like Clive Spencer, you know, many people from within the visually impaired community and at, you know, the Worcester College wouldn't have had the opportunities to take part in sport like they have. So, you know, thank you so much for that, Clive. Darren, just as we sort of move on, you know, you spoke a lot about your journey and the sports you participated in as a youngster. You know, it always seemed that you were destined to achieve and have success in sport. And can you recall your earliest sort of success of when you sort of achieved a very well-renowned title, and what sport was that involved in?
So yeah, I did athletics, I suppose, to start with. I mean, football back then was, I never thought of football as sport. It was just having fun. You know, we played football at lunchtime, we played after school, we played weekends. But I used to go down to the athletics club in the evenings. We used to train at Worcester on occasions, down on this, it wasn't a tartan track, it was one of those old sort of baked mud tracks it was. But they had a proper track over at Hereford. And so we used to drive over there in the evenings and train over there. So I'd play for football for like 2 hours and then go straight down the athletics club and do another hours of training, and then probably come back from there and carry on playing football. But yeah, athletics was the thing. We competed in all the BBS events. There was all the other VI schools like Exwell Grange and Nicky Grange, and we went to those events over at Solihull and Coventry, and there was the BSAD events as well. We went to those. So athletics was the thing that I was probably competitive in, and I was really lucky to be selected for the World Junior Championships, and I won it. I was World Junior Champion over 100 meters, and I was 17 years old.
Incredible. And I suppose, you know, having the opportunity to go and represent your country at such a young age was, you know, a massive thing, you know, for anybody, let alone, you know, as a 17-year-old boy. But what an experience to have. Yeah,
I mean, we got the coach over there, and you know, got on the ferry. It was kind of like, you know, when you watch films like, you know, Road Trip, you were there with all these other guys from all these other schools who were like the same age as you, and you know, we had a credible laugh. There was just a great bonding experience, and it was the thing that I probably take most out of sport. You know, yeah, obviously you went there to compete and do well, but it was just all of the stuff around it, the camaraderie with your teammates.
Definitely. And, you know, that sporting community and those friends that you make often tend to be lifelong friends, which is, you know, a massive part of why I strongly believe that people should take up sport and get involved and be active.
Yeah, definitely.
So Simon, as you returned from those World Championships, you shortly afterwards you began to attend university. So what was that sort of like, making the transition from, you know, New College Worcester, and then I believe you went up north, didn't you? And is it Sheffield that you studied at?
Yeah. So I went to university in Sheffield. I think actually one of the reasons why I chose Sheffield was because it was the year after the World Student Games in 1991, and they'd built Don Valley Stadium and Punchford, and you know, it had a kind of quite a sporting kind of pedigree. And I was still doing athletics when I went to university. And I remember sort of going down to the track after my lectures and then kind of getting back sort of late in the evening, and all my mates had all disappeared down the pub, and after a while I kind of sort of fell out of athletics really, because I just missed out on my social life. So yeah, I did enjoy going out and partying a lot at university, and I got quite unfit really. I was literally probably out 5 or 6 times a week for 3 years, and just managed to scrape through with a 2:2 degree in mathematics of all subjects.
it's like most students there, Darren, you know, going out and enjoying their time and their freedom. And regardless of that, you know, the grade that you got in the, you know, your studies, you still come away with a degree, which is, you know, exceptional.
I mean, in terms of even the transition academically, and I guess this is more of a focus on sport, but one of the things that we'd got used to at Worcester is that obviously it was a school where everything catered for your disability. So, you know, I remember getting your textbooks were in Braille, your homework came back with comments on it in Braille. And when I went to university, there was none of that support whatsoever. It was like, you know, I suppose we were pioneers, I suppose you might think of it. But I remember when I was doing my homework that I had to borrow somebody's notes from my lectures, get someone to read those notes to me. Then I would braille them up. Then I would go down the library, get someone to read some stuff out of the library for me, make some more notes, work out how to do my homework, write out my answers, and then read my answers to someone to write down and then hand it in. And that was an incredibly long-winded process. So although I was sort of a little bit disappointed at the time of the 2-2, and I look back on it again with the benefit of hindsight, I realised that actually what I did was pretty amazing.
Definitely. And the amount of extra work you've had to put in there, Darren, just, you know, because of the lack of understanding and awareness of that around people with a visual impairment. That's a, you know, full credit to yourself. And I'm sure the lecturers and, you know, would sort of look back on that now and hopefully have a different mentality around how they could better support you and be more inclusive with their teaching.
Absolutely.
And we've just had some questions come through on Facebook, Darren, and our first one is from a young lady called Rasheen, and she has asked if all sports were fully inclusive and accessible for VI people, what sport would you play and why?
Oh, good question. I think, you know, we'll go on to talk about judo later, but I suppose judo was definitely the sport I enjoyed most. And I think partly because of the people, really. They just seem to have more in common with them. We seem to be from more similar backgrounds. And there was just more honesty, I suppose. People, I think in my experience of football often is that people had a lot to say, but, you know, you couldn't, you know, at them basically. While in judo, people didn't really mouth off at each other. We used to fight and then we were friends afterwards. And I much kind of preferred that environment. So yeah, judo was definitely the one I loved most. But I started judo very late, and I was never going to be as good at judo as I was at football.
Well, we can, you know, pick up on your judo a little bit later on, and, you know, which I find truly inspiring anyway, to, you know, the story behind how you got involved with that. So you finally graduated on, you know, from university, as you mentioned, and then you joined the National Blind Football League, and shortly afterwards. Oh, can you hear me now, Darren?
I think David's frozen, I think.
Can you hear me?
I think he was going to ask
guys?
me about how I got back into football, and so for the benefit of our listeners, I graduated in 1995.
He's back with us.
Yeah, continue, Darren. Sorry, my internet has had a hissy fit, I believe.
We'll have to get you a fibre optic broadband or something.
Yeah, I might have to get that little mouse a bit more cheese to keeping that wheel turning.
Yeah, I started playing. I mean, I did play a little bit of football at university with my mates. Actually, you could see they're all sighted and stuff, and all the guys I lived with at university are all footballers actually. So, and I used to go training with them, and I would take the corners and free kicks, and it was my way of kind of keeping my hand in. But obviously, when I finished university, I really wanted to kind of get back fit again, because I'd been out partying a bit too much, and yeah, I started playing in the National Blind Football League, and I still had a little bit of vision then. And I remember when I turned up to the league, you know, players then didn't even wear blindfolds, and so I kind of said to them, well, you know, is it okay if I play with you guys? Because I just didn't feel I had enough sight to play partial sight football. And they said, well, you can if you wear a blindfold. So I used to play with those guys, and I was the only one wearing a blindfold, but, you know, we were just trying to do our best to make things as fair as possible. So, and then Tony Larkin, who was the England coach at that time, came along to one of those games and spotted me and invited me to the England training camps. And and I was selected for my first tournament, which was out in Spain. I went to Madrid, and I made my debut, and it was a pretty horrific debut as it happens. I came on as a substitute, and after a couple of minutes he took me back off because I was that bad. And I think the reason why is because I still had that bit of vision. And I remember just, putting on my blindfold and, Dan English has joined us.
Yeah.
Hope he's not going to ask me anything difficult. And so what happened was that I put my blindfold on, and you just get submerged into darkness, and so it was really, really disorientating. I remember coming on the pitch, and I was bumping into my teammates, I was bumping into the opposition, I was bumping into the boards, and I suppose out of mercy, really, Tony took me off and gave me that moment to reflect. And what I started to do after that was put my blindfold on a good hour or two before a game, so that by the time it was my turn to come on the pitch, literally I'd sort of become acclimatized to the darkness, and and was just sort of forgot about using any eyesight I had, and the rest is history.
Yes, incredible that you mentioned around that obstacle that you faced early on in your career, Darren. Would you say, or have you had any other obstacles or really big boundaries that you've faced during your sporting career, and if so, how did you manage to overcome those?
So I think for me, one of my biggest obstacles, I suppose, was kind of managing my emotions. I was always quite I was always in conflict with everyone from from day dot. I was quite an angry child, and I think in partly my losing my sight, also my relationship with my dad. There was lots of reasons why I was angry, and I suppose as I remember starting to work with a psychologist, and because when I started sport, you just thought that you just had to train hard, get fit, work on the technique side of the game, but no one ever really thought about psychology. And I remember when I met this psychologist for the very first time, and I remember walking into the room and sort of saying to him, well, can you guarantee me a gold medal? And he says no, and said, well, is there any point in me speaking to you then? And that was really my attitude to psychology. And after half an hour, he kind of blew my mind, really. But I was probably more than halfway through my career when I even started to think about how important that aspect of performance was. And then it took me even longer to actually be able to put it into practice, apply what I learned to actually improving performance. So yeah, that was I had an awful lot of sort of fallouts with teammates, with coaches, and there's definitely times when I could have. It's not that I was wrong in what I said, but I think there was always a way to do it, which probably could have made things end up a bit differently.
I think when you're so competitive like you are, the standards that you're set and the drive that you have to be successful, sometimes you do have those little bits of conflict or disagreements with teammates, but the way that you get over them is how you become stronger and unite more as a team, isn't it? So
yeah,
it is a learning curve and a big journey, and a lot of people are not aware of the psychology around in sport, as you mentioned, and it does have a big impact on people, and they can implement that in other areas of their life, which you have done yourself, Darren. So yeah, it's very inspiring. I'm going to sort of open up the floor again and ask if any of our listeners would like to ask you a question again at all, before proceeding and asking a question that we've had on Facebook. If anybody would like to ask Darren a question, please feel free to unmute yourself, which you can do by just holding your spacebar down on your keyboard. It doesn't appear that anyone at the moment has a question, but that's not a problem, Darren. On Facebook, we've had a lady called Laura, who, funnily enough, was one of my ex-students at a college I used to teach at. And she has just asked, this is a little bit around COVID, but, do you see a future for blind football post-COVID? And if so, how do you think it's changed?
So I think they are trying to find ways to put protocols in place so that the game can kind of continue. Obviously, it does have its challenges. It's a team sport, and we do rely on sort of being guided as well. You know, you often you're walking around and you've got hold of someone on the shoulder or whatever just to navigate around certain areas. But I'm sure that the game will come back, and obviously COVID isn't going to be here forever. So, but it has definitely been a challenging time for the last sort of 10 months, certainly for the lads who are still involved in the game.
Definitely. And while we're sort of on the subject of COVID, Darren, what sort of challenges have you faced, or what difficulties have you sort of had to overcome through this period of lockdown and isolation?
So I'm a very social person. I love training with people. I've never really liked training on my own, and I've always been part of lots of recreational running groups. And so during lockdown, it was really difficult to carry on doing that. And I remember, I did try kind of keeping up my walking. So I would just literally kind of go out my front door and put my sat nav on and just walk different routes. There was a local train station near me, so I used to just get the train a couple of stops and then work out on my way home. So it was quite kind of trying to find interesting ways of doing that. I got lost a couple of times. I think I was on the call to Dan actually at one of those actually back in the day. But after a while, you kind of you run out of new and interesting routes to find, and you can get yourself in a bit of a rut. I was really kind of pleased, obviously, when lockdown ended and I was kind of got back out with the guys, but I'd lost so much fitness in that period of time. So as we entered the version 2 of the lockdown, I was really keen not to make sure that happened again. So I have kept up my training much better this time, and but it's been a real challenge, and I did some stuff at home, but you have to be in a real mindset to train at home. It's completely different. It's a bit like speaking, actually. Doing stuff online at home is so different because there's a journey in getting to somewhere, and that's part of your preparation. So I kind of liked going to the gym as much as what I did when I was there. And sometimes when it's in your living room or your bedroom, it doesn't quite feel the same. You don't tend to put in the same amount of effort and energy.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not only the VI community that have faced these barriers. Having that routine and structure in place is something I think is very important. And if you could give one bit of advice to someone around trying to develop or construct some form of routine, what would that be?
Yeah, so it's knowing when you're at your best, I suppose. I'm definitely a morning person, so I always function better in the morning. I always train better in the morning. So it's kind of identifying some time in your day or your week that works for you. I always say, don't start off like super keen. Everyone's kind of good, right? I'm going to train every single day, and then what usually happens is that they just run out of momentum and they kind of grind to a steady halt. I always think it's best to just do it the other way around. Find a time in a day that you can commit to every single week. Start there. Once you build that into a routine, you get used to that. Then you add the next level on. Now you find another session that you can add in somewhere else, and say, right, now I'm going to try 2 sessions a week. Now I'm going to try 3 sessions a week. But so often it's because people want instant results, and they start off like a bull in a china shop, and then literally within 2 or 3 weeks they're not doing anything.
Yeah, I think that's key what you've just mentioned there, Darren, that consistency is key.
Yeah.
So sort of we're going to go back to obviously your professional career, and following your experience in Spain, in Madrid with your first international cap. You then went on to win 6 consecutive European medals. So how did that experience differ to your initial experience to international football, and what changes did you make other than the putting on your eye mask an hour or so before the game?
So yeah, it was great actually. We had some those early trips were a lot. We had a lot of fun on those trips, and the lads and the team. We performed relatively well. We had a couple of really close Shaves, I always remember the final in 2001 where, we were 1-0 up with a few minutes to go, and we ended up kind of losing that tournament. And I remember, taking over as captain the following year, and what I was trying to instill in the team was that to perform well in these tournaments, it couldn't just be what you did at the tournament. It had to be what you did in the rest of the year. And that preparation was just much, much longer. Because what we tended to find out is in the tournaments is that we'd play really well for a couple of games, but just the volume intensity of the games kind of caught up here. We used to have these really tight schedules where we'd be playing 5 or 6 matches in 6 days or 7 days. So we literally got no rest in between games, and players started to pick up niggles, and then those niggles turn into injuries. And I say by the time we got to the semi-finals and finals, it was a little bit like a triage clinic, and we had the physio strapping and taping and gluing people back together. And I always felt that we would have performed so much better if we could just, get that sort of level of intensity throughout the year, because that was the only really way that you're going to consistently perform well.
Very true. And as you sort of, you transitioned and became England captain, you know, which would have been a very, very, pleasing and proud time in your life, just prior to the Athens Games in 2004. The FA wouldn't obviously sanction the GB team, so unfortunately you were unable to go to the Paralympics that year, and you took the transition and went into full-time judo.
Yeah,
that must have been a very challenging time. Could you please tell our audience a little bit about that sort of experience and the emotions that you felt at the time?
Yeah, I suppose my transition to judo really was by chance. I'd started judo in the start of 2000s, and it was just a friend. I was working in IT at the time. I had a full-time job in IT, and one of my work colleagues was big into karate, and he just said to me after work one day, he said, "Do you fancy a bit of judo?" He says, I fancy doing something different to karate." And I thought, well, I've always liked fighting, so maybe it'd work for me. And I had tried judo when I was at Worcester. Actually, there was a guy there, Gus McKinnon, who'd taken us down to this judo club. And I suppose back in those days, it was like one of those old sports halls where you had, this cupboard full of sweat-stained gis, and they're covered in cobwebs, and it was a bit dusty and musty, and didn't really kind of sell it to me, to be honest. And also, I was a very outdoor person. I loved the outdoors. I didn't really want to be inside a hall. And also, when you start off doing judo, they teach you safety first, because obviously that's quite important. You don't want people to get hurt or injured. And so you kind of practice hold downs and break falls. But I wanted to do the sort of big exciting stuff, throwing people, sky high and watching them come tumbling down. That was the side of judo that really kind of excited me. And that's not what you got to do when you start off. So I kind of only tried that judo for sort of a few sessions at the start. But anyway, with my friend, I decided to go along. So we found this local judo club. I was living in Cardiff at the time, and we started going there on a Tuesday and a Thursday, and it was great. I took to it really, really quickly, and within a couple of weeks, I thought, I want to do a bit more of this, because I think I got a little bit bored of going to the gym, lifting weights and going on the treadmill and rowing and all that kind of stuff. I just found it a bit boring, really. I wanted to learn something. I wanted to use my brain, and so I found another club that had a session on a Friday. So literally within 3 weeks, I was doing judo 3 nights a week, and then probably within I turned up one day to the National Judo Centre in Sophia Gardens, or the Welsh Institute of Sport. And this is where the able-bodied Welsh national team trained. And I don't know why I thought I could just rock up and start training with them, but that was the kind of person I was. I just thought, well, let's go and have a go. If you want to get better, you have to train with better athletes. And I turned up there, and they wouldn't train with me, funny enough. These are all sort of black belt, national and international judo players. And, you know, I did the warm up, and then I was sort of standing on the side waiting for a practice, and no one would practice with me. And the coach there was a guy called Alan Jones. And luckily for me, he had coached Simon Jackson, who was a sort of 3-time Paralympic judo champion, and back in the day. So he'd come across blind judo athletes before. So he saw all these guys who didn't want to train with me, and he just grabbed hold of me by my collar, dragged me on the mat, and said, "Don't worry, I'll train with you." And he's dragging me around the mat. And then he does the James Bond. It's the technique where you put your foot in their stomach and you flip them over your head. And I land bang on this wooden floor. And I get up and I dust myself down. And he turns around to all the other guys in the club and he says, "Look, he gets up. He's not made of porcelain. I get stuck into him." And that was the moment. That was like the icebreaker. And after that, the guys, you know, sort of took me under their wing really and gave me a good hiding.
I think that, you know, that experience there is key. And it sort of demonstrates that many people that are involved in coaching sport are very afraid to sort of take that leap and coach someone with a disability. And just understanding, you know, how to make those adaptations are key. And this coach here has obviously, you know, been able to do that in a way where his athletes can look at him and go, well, actually, no, he's no different to us. He can still get up. He can still take, you know, punishment's the wrong word, but, you know.
No, you're absolutely right. And because I've had the opposite experience. So when I moved back to Birmingham, I was looking for, you know, a club to start running with, and I turned up to Royal Sutton Athletics Club, and I'd contacted the secretary there, and I said, you know, if you got anyone there who'd be happy to guide me, and he kind of says, "Oh no, I don't think that would be safe, and I wouldn't want to put that responsibility on any of the guys," and he kind of just gave me sort of a brick wall and said, like, unless you're really a persistent person, or if you've had some positive experiences, those early setbacks, those people saying no, those people putting doors in front of you, might be the only time you ever try. And but I was lucky. I found another way in. But yeah, it can work the other way.
Definitely. So, Darren, my next question, obviously, you know, the training regimes going into full-time judo would have been very different to your training regime of playing football. You know, what would sort of the average day of training for each sport look like and differ?
So nowadays, football is full-time. So the guys do train an awful lot more than what we did back then. So I had to do, when I was doing football back then, I did most of my fitness myself. So it was pretty much, so I went to the gym every day. I was always running. I was always getting myself cardiovascularly fit. And then we'd meet up at weekends and train together then as a squad or play league matches. So that was that kind of involvement in terms of football. But the judo was completely different. When I decided to go full-time as a judo athlete, I was training twice a day, every day. I was doing, you know, 12 sessions a week. And I remember at first I was literally ill every other day. I always had a cold. I always had, you know, because my body, my immune system just wasn't used to that volume of training. And the other aspect that was massively important for me is I wasn't very flexible. A lot of the football lads didn't stretch kind of religiously, and the judo lads would stretch before the session. So the session might start at 10, but at 9:30 they'd all be on the mat, you know, doing their stretches, and that's how they kind of recovered from the day before. And so yeah, my flexibility started to improve massively. But yeah, I was doing 5 or 6 sort of judo sessions a week, and then I was doing, you know, 2 or 3 cardio sessions and 2 or 3 gym sessions. It was, I had a Russian coach actually. So when I first went full time, and he was probably the main reason why I went full time, because I wasn't really sure if I could really, you know, qualify for a Paralympic Games in judo, in my second sport, in really sort of only doing judo for sort of 8 years. And but we had this Russian coach, and I just had this sort of belief in him that he could help me get to where I needed to go. And but he did work as hard. But he knew his stuff. You know, when you went around his house was like a library. You know, he had DVDs, he had books. You know, he talked about judo day in and day out. And I remember one of my training colleagues, you know, every time he got frustrated and he'd take his kit off and he'd throw it on the floor and he'd storm out. And then he'd come back in and then the coach would go, so now you're ready to train again. And it was like, it was as much kind of cognitively, mentally challenging as it was physically. You know, you had to do a lot of thinking to understand, you know, what it is you were trying to achieve.
That's you know, very important. Again, there, like you said, you know, if you've got your mind in the right place, you can go on to achieve some incredible things. And you did ultimately reach your, you know, dream of competing at the Paralympics. So what was that experience like in 2008 in Beijing?
Yeah, so I remember when I did qualify, and it was really strange because bizarrely I was still playing football actually up until a year before that, and because I didn't know whether football was going to be in the Paralympics, and so I'd kind of put my mind on judo, but I had carried on playing football, and it was really odd. But I remember the day when I qualified, and because I was there sitting, because what happened, you got ranking points from different tournaments, European Championships, like world championships, etc. And we had this little spreadsheet, and because they didn't publish the ranking lists, like it took them ages to publish them. It might be sort of 2 or 3 months before they got published. And I was there with my spreadsheet and my calculator trying to work out how many points I'd got and seeing who could potentially catch me up and looking at what tournaments they were fighting and seeing if they'd got any points in those tournaments. And I had this sort of spreadsheet tallying up these points so I could try and work out if I'd qualified before the official news came through. But when it did, I was so relieved. I was so happy. I mean, going to the games was just crazy. It was, it's eye-opening, really. You never really grasp the scale of it. You know, the canteen, the size of the canteen. I didn't go to the opening ceremony because I was competing on the very first day. And also I'd never really competed in front of a massive crowd. You know, I think one of the blind tournaments I went to in Spain, we'd had a crowd of a couple of thousand. But it was, when you play blind football, actually the crowd have to be quiet. And so I remember when I was in the warm-up area for judo, and I could hear the stadium was literally rumbling. And as I walked out in the middle, I couldn't hear my coach. So I remember walking on to fight this Cuban guy who was Victor Sanchez. He was the world champion at the time. And normally, you know, your coach can give you a bit of information, some instructions, but there was 8,000 people in the stadium screaming and shouting, and I couldn't hear a word he was saying. And I thought, well, you're on your own, Daz. And that was that. But yeah, I lost to the Cuban, and all the football lads teased me because, you know, I lasted, I think, 45 seconds. I got thrown, and I'm sort of looking up at the ceiling thinking, well, is this it? And I remember walking off, and you go through the mix zone, which is, you know, where the journalists come up to you and, you know, they stuck a fluffy microphone in your face, and they kind of, this lady asked me, oh, how do you feel? And I thought, I've just spent the last 4 years, you know, giving sweat, blood and tears to get to this moment, and it's kind of ended in not the way I wanted. And I didn't really know how to frame that. So I just said to her, well, you know, imagine your partner sleeping your best friend. And I put that into words. And and that was the end of the interview. And there was this highlight show later with Claire Baldwin on the BBC, kind of saying, well, we don't have Darren's interview because he walked out. But yeah, it was really emotional, incredibly emotional. And but, you know, it was an incredible experience.
I can imagine it was, Darren. And what a lot of people don't know about judo is that, you know, it's a point scoring system when you fight, but ultimately if you get thrown directly on your back, it's over. It doesn't matter how long the fight's gone on for. So
absolutely.
And sometimes, and you know, it could have well gone the other way. You could have beat the world #1 at the time. It's one of those games, you know, in sports that anything can happen, isn't it?
Yeah, and sometimes you got to hold your hand up and say someone's better than you. I never beat him before that day, I never beat him. After that day, he and that's just the way it is sometimes.
So you continued with your judo until 2011, and then you returned to play international football. What was sort of the driving force behind returning to football, Darren? Was it the enjoyment, or?
Not really. I finished judo because I just started to pick up injuries. So I remember 2010, I broke my ribs. 2011, I tore my ankle ligaments, and I just felt that the volume of training I had to do to get to the level I needed to get was kind of unrealistic. I was 30. I think I was 38 then. Doing the maths. I was just starting to sort of struggle really, and I was quite sort of down and depressed when I finished judo really, and I didn't really think about coming back to football. It was just really one of my teammates who called me up and said, would I come back and stuff, and I'd started playing in the league again, and then I got invited to a tournament before the European Championships. Went there. I think my first game back, we played Argentina and we lost 5-0, got absolutely battered. I thought, welcome back to playing football. But yeah, it was really tough. That next year and a half was probably the hardest in my career really. I really struggled. It was a completely different group of people from the players that I'd left. So when I'd left, there was, this group of lads, and I came back and there was a new set of lads. So there was a completely new set of people to get used to, and they didn't really know me and I didn't know them. And even though I came back and I had 82 caps, so it wasn't like I didn't know how to play football, but I just didn't get on with my teammates. And so it was a real struggle for me. And it was really interesting because I ended up doing a TEDx talk, and I talked about, having some sort of mental health challenges, and it was during that time, and no one really knew how I felt, and it was really difficult to talk about it. And I remember it was in Madrid, actually, literally 3 months before the Paralympic Games. We'd gone to a tournament in Madrid, and it was like one of these round robin tournaments, and the final game was on the same day that we were going to fly back. So we were due to play France, and then we were going to fly back later that evening. And we'd gone to breakfast, so I'd gone back to our room, and we were supposed to pack and have all of our stuff ready, and we were going to just take it to the picture of us so that we could go to the airport soon after the game. And I remember there's just a knock on my room, and one of my teammates walked in. I hadn't packed, I was still lying on my bed. And he's like, what are you doing? And I just couldn't get up. I just couldn't drag myself out of bed. And he sort of helped me shovel all my stuff into my bag. And, we went over to the pitch, and all my teammates were already warming up. And no one really understood what was going on. I didn't really understand what was going on, to be honest. I just knew I was struggling. And I remember sitting down with the team doctor and having a chat about things. And I realized that, I didn't give it the word depression. I didn't really kind of think of that label, but I knew that I was struggling with life. And I think a lot of it was just to do with just sort of finishing judo and kind of going back to football, and a few other things that were going on in my personal life. I'd left Bath, where I had a lot of kind of happy memories. I'd moved back to the Midlands, where I was from, but didn't have any friends, because I just moved back to kind of a new city, and suppose I felt really isolated at that time. And so London was a really, really tough game for me. I wasn't really on speaking terms with my coach, didn't spend a lot of time with my teammates. I'd play the games, and we'd train together, and we'd play games, and I'd kind of, just hang out with my judo mates, to be honest. And it was a pretty miserable time. So it was really interesting, because everyone says, oh, London must have been amazing. You had your friends there, you had your family there. And it was great for those guys to come and see me, and because obviously, it was a lot easier to get there than it was to Beijing. But on a personal level, it was probably my toughest tournament ever.
Yeah, it's amazing, really, the different experience and emotions that you've had in the two different games, because in the build up to Beijing, it was very positive, and there was that excitement of achieving that dream and that goal of getting to the Paralympics. But your experience at London 2012 was very different. You know, and it just goes to show that, you know, with mental health and things, it is better to talk about it, and it is difficult, like you've said. But being able to, you know, try and understand what is going on is the biggest difficulty of all. And I think when you're able to do that, that's when you can get back on track and start making positive changes, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot more awareness about it now. People feel like they can talk about things now, but it's still a challenge, because, you know, maybe for men, it's, you know, admitting that the things aren't, you know, you're not as strong as you thought you were, or things aren't going the way you want them to go. It can be a real challenge to kind of open up. And who do you open up to? Because sometimes you think that people might hold that against you. So, yeah, but I do think there's definitely more sport in place now. And if I was going through those same experiences now, I think it would be different. But at the time, yeah, it was a real difficult one.
I can imagine it was, Darren. And you continued to play football competitively until 2019. Obviously, as you,
I was in and out of the team a lot. You know, so, you know, after London 2012, the coach kind of dropped me, and he decided he was going to focus on the younger players. And then UK Sport got involved, and that's when the football started to get contracts. Some of the players started to get contracts, and then so they changed the coach, and then the new coach came in. He called me back into the team, and then we had a disappointing European Championships, and I was back at the team again for another year and a half, and then and it was kind of carried on like that for sort of the next sort of four years, and then actually in literally just before 2017, I was called back into the team one final time, and I thought to myself, you know what, I might not get another chance. That one completely came out of the blue, and you know, I had a phone call. Someone had got injured. A couple of players had got injured, and I always say to people, you know, you've got to be ready when that call comes. You've got to be ready when that opportunity comes your way, and I always carried on training. I always kept myself fit, and I always knew that if I was ever lucky enough to get another call, that I'd be ready. And yeah, I suppose the last 2 years of my career were actually pretty good. From 2017 to 2019, you know, I really knuckled down, got into sort of a good routine, got some good training people around me, and yeah, finished off on a high.
I'm very pleased that, you know, reflecting on that time in your career, it was a positive one after some of the, you know, difficulties that you did face, Darren. You know, you had an incredible career through sport, not only football, but judo and athletics. But if you go back and sort of relive one particular moment during your career, what do you think that would be, and why?
Oh, there's a few. I suppose if I could do London 2012 again, and the one moment in London 2012 was we played Iran in the semi-final. In the third game of our group. So we played Argentina and Spain in the group. So we got 2 draws, and they were the 2 best teams in the group on paper. And then they'd both beaten Iran, and we had to beat Iran by 2 goals to get into the semi-finals. And I remember we were 1-0 down at half time, and walked into the changing room at half time, and it was a little bit like a morgue. And I'd never really been in an atmosphere like that, where, you know, the players seemed so dejected, and I always sort of think back that had I had a sort of better relationship with my teammates, had I had kind of more influence at that time, that I would have said something, I would have done something to kind of rally the troops and get everyone back on that kind of positive vibe, because it wasn't over at that point. And the sports taught me, if it's taught me anything, it's that, you know, you never give up until, you know, the final whistle. And so that was definitely my biggest regret, that I know I didn't speak out, and I didn't do anything positively to kind of try and reverse that momentum in the game. So that's one of those big regrets. But, you know, you can't have everything in life, can you?
You can't, but, you know, the ability to reflect on those situations, you know, if you're in that position again in any other sort of, you know, time in your life, you know that you're going to be ready to face that challenge and do something positive about it. So, you know, it's a constant learning thing, and you know, you've always talked about reflection throughout this podcast, and you know, that's something that is a skill in itself, Darren, and not many people have the ability to do so. I'm just going to sort of ask our audience if they have any questions before we sort of wrap this up. So if anyone does, please feel free to unmute yourselves and proceed with your questions. I know we have a couple on Facebook that I'll ask you in a moment. With a very quiet audience today, Darren, but it's not a problem. So one of our people that are listening through the Facebook live stream, they've asked, what advice would you give to someone who isn't particularly keen on sport? Because, you know, many people are very apprehensive around taking up sport. You know, what would be the one bit of advice that you could give?
So I think we sell sport really badly. I suppose that our focus is always on, you know, getting fit or losing weight, or, you know, or maybe the kids kind of growing big muscles. And I think for me, the biggest thing about sport is its impact on our mental health and our mindset. We're designed to move. We are born to move, and I think, you know, especially in this kind of time right now where everyone's stuck to sitting on the sofa on a Zoom chat and in the online world, it's even more important that we get out and try and move and do a little bit. And what you perceive as sport, it doesn't have to be running. It doesn't have to be playing football or judo or anything like that. Sport can be anything. You know, you can just really start really basic, doing some press ups or some sit ups or doing anything. I just think taking that first step and starting something and just challenging yourself to see if you can do better the next time. And that's the great thing about sport, isn't it? Because you can always see progression. Even if I have a few months off and I think, gosh, I'm back to that point now. If I start at it again, you know, I'm always going to improve. And there's a brilliant book actually that a guy wrote called Younger Next Year, and he did some work with some guys, and he was encouraging people to start exercising. These people are in their 60s and 70s and 80s, and some of those had a whole lifetime without doing any sport. And even for those people, they were able to make really big improvements, even at that stage of their life. So, you know what, it doesn't matter when you start, just as long as you do start.
That's a great message to end this podcast on, Darren. And I really want to thank you for your time and your honesty throughout the podcast. It's gave us a really good insight into the positives and, you know, some of the lower points that sports men and women can face. I've really enjoyed hosting you. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Dave. Take care.
Not a problem. For those that are listening in, this is our final episode today. We, you know, will be looking at exploring a second series of a podcast in the new year. So please keep a watchful sort of eye and listening into our Facebook channels and YouTube platform to see what is coming up. So thank you all for listening, and I hope you have a fantastic day.